Hey, I hope everybody's doing well. In this video, I just want to go over a little bit about inflation. I know everybody seems to talk about that. We talk about it, and I'm not one to say that the uh, insanely high inflation numbers will not settle back down, but I am one to say that inflation will always be here. Our monetary system requires inflationary pressures, and that's not really the point of this video, so I don't want to get too far into the weeds on that, but just understand that inflation is not good for wage earners, but it is good for asset holders that benefit from inflation. And inflation is always going to be around. In fact, the Federal Reserve targets inflation, so they target about 2% a year using their numbers, which I would argue, and I think most people would argue in the real economy that those numbers are underreported. No politician wants to give, or no government wants to give bad news to voters. So there's ways they measure the numbers or report the numbers that aren't necessarily reflective of the real world. So I just want to go over a couple things that we've seen here in the real world to kind of get away from some of the confusion created by using fancy terminology in the mainstream media and the central planners, the central bankers and politicians and so forth. Some of the ways they talk can get confusing. So where we're at, we produce a lot of thermal coal, probably more, well, definitely more than anywhere in the country. And according to the Energy Information Administration, coal all through December of 2021, Powder River Basin coal, where we're at, was selling for $30.10 short ton. In January here, it's at 28.05. You may say, okay, well, compared to what? Looking at a chart from the same organization back from 2020 to 2001, the highest it ever traded on there was $13.78, and that was in 2012. Using the government's inflation numbers, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have an inflation calculator there, and that number, that 1378 that it sold for in 2012, would be 1673 now. So almost double that adjusted for inflation, almost double all-time highs, all-time 20-year highs adjusted for inflation. So somebody's absorbing that cost to heat their home. Somebody's heating their home with electricity, and they're absorbing that cost. And it's not a natural increase in cost. It's from a bunch of disruptions that happened in the economy based on a number of actions that central planners took. But anyway, it is unfortunate that there's a lot of folks out there earning wages that are going to be paying a whole lot more for heating this season, because the coal prices, for a number of reasons, not just gas prices, but there's a whole bunch of reasons with coal stockpiles, but they're just selling at crazy high prices. So I use that and I say, okay, well, let's compare that to something. The BLS.gov, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they have an inflation calculator. So I just threw in there, using their numbers. If $100 in January of 2019, if you had $100 then, in December 2021, according to that calculator, $110.76 would have the same purchasing power. So that averages out to almost 5.5% a year over the 2 years. But I think that we would argue that in the real economy, the way real people are spending real money, it's certainly higher than that. And this coal is an example of that. I mean, selling it almost 3 times multiples, or at least double adjusted for inflation off all-time highs. And unfortunately, it's sad, but people are going to have to pay that bill to heat their home this winter. And then I was looking at an article on money.com regarding cars, and it talks about used cars have skyrocketed lately, up 26% year over year versus a 10% increase on new cars, according to the BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics. Now, according to money.com, Money obtained data from Edmunds, an automotive research firm, where the average price of a used car last month was 28,607, up from 22,400, which is a 27% increase. So that's what I was getting at. 27% increase is what they're seeing there. And then I was looking in that same article, and it was talking about on average that in it looks like in October, people were paying about $800 above the sticker price, and they had some data here showing that new cars were selling on average about 13% higher. So Obviously, that's way over what government numbers are reporting, and we could see that in real rents. I mean, groceries, a number of things. But I want to go over here just some things that we have personally been informed we're going to absorb. On our personal residence, we noted our homeowners insurance is up 13.8%. It's what it's going to be this year. We have some drafting software that we use in our construction company for designing homes, and we got notified that's up 25%. Our trash bill 20%. We have a company that we have on our team that we hire to do a lot of our operational stuff from one of our companies, and we were informed the labor costs on that are going up 25% the 1st of February. 25%, that's a lot on labor. So just wanted to point out some real world things that are happening in how that compares to what the government says the numbers are, which they're right at about 7% year over year right now. And I'm not going to go too far off. I know there's other videos we've done, and we will do some more on what's driving that. But just understand this, that the system requires inflation. It may not require 7% in reported numbers, but they require significant inflation because it's a debt-based system, and debt likes inflation because essentially the inflation ends up erasing the debt obligation. So when you have the amount of debt, our entire monetary system's perpetual debt. If you're a saver or you're a wage earner or both, you get crushed. So the point is, that's why we're so passionate about our why is to own real decentralized assets that are needed by real people in the real economy, so that typically those things benefit from inflation. And that ties into freedom, because as automation takes over jobs in years coming, artificial intelligence and robotics and so forth, it's going to push more people to government dependency as those people lose jobs. And that's going to drive up social programs. It's going to drive up the federal budgets. It's going to require more inflation because it requires more debt. So I just think people need to understand that all that ties into freedom, because at some point those people, or we as a society, as we start relying on the masses, start relying on the few being the central planners, the politicians, so forth, is we start to rely on them for basic necessities, whether that's stimulus checks or universal basic income, or advanced child tax credits, or whatever the case may be. Is we start to rely on them, they start to get in a position of more control. And that's why we say economics is generational freedom. It is, if we become a very, very dependent society on government to satisfy our economic needs, we will flip back to what most of world history has been, which has been largely rooted in socialism and centralized governments, as opposed to free markets and capitalism and the wealth and power belonging to the people. Over time, that will switch back. And that's why we are so passionate about trying to get people informed and getting them to understand the benefit of real assets and how they can hedge those risks for themselves and their families. So with that, we'll see you on the next video, and I appreciate you watching.